Everyone laughed at the abandoned bride, and despite everyone, she married a street homeless person. The guests were shocked, but after a while they almost died of envy. Gwen boarded the plane and leaned back in her seat, immersed in thoughts of how happy her parents would be when they saw her after such a long absence. She had not been to her hometown for 3 years, absorbed in her studies and career ambitions. She had just graduated from law school and was about to return home to spend time with her family after spending many months studying how to protect the rights of those who truly needed it. After several hours of flight, the plane finally landed. Gwen stretched and forced herself to smile as she remembered that she would soon see her parents. However, her joy was short-lived. At the baggage counter, she was informed that her suitcase was lost. Gwen's heart sank with disappointment, and she couldn't help but let out an exasperated sigh. "So this is how you greet me, hometown," she muttered, calling a taxi through a mobile application. Hours of waiting and even little things like lost luggage seemed insurmountable obstacles that took her away from the feeling of a long-awaited return. As Gwen stood by the road, leaning against the wall of the airport, a passing car splashed her, hitting a puddle left over from a recent rain. The liquid from the puddle clung to her jeans, leaving noticeable stains that seemed only accentuated by the gray, rainy sky. Gwen sighed, rubbing the spots and feeling her irritation build. Damn, that was just not enough. What kind of day is this? She was nervous, trying to rub off the stains on her jeans, which seemed to be spreading. When her taxi finally arrived, Gwen was already on edge. She got into the car and, without waiting for the driver to start talking, stuck the headphones in her ears. The music absorbed her, allowing her to forget a little about her anxiety and stress. Attention switched to the sounds of your favorite tracks, which allowed you to relax a little and focus on the upcoming. As the car moved towards her parents' house, Gwen lost herself in thoughts of how everything would turn out. Memories of my childhood spent in this city and how much had changed over the years surfaced in my head. She dreamed of meeting her parents, how they would hug her, and how nice it would be to just be at home. However, the stress of the trip and the disappointment of her lost luggage made her nervous. The taxi stopped in front of her parents' house, and Gwen noticed how the joyful feelings were beginning to return. She got out of the car, before leaving it, took one last look at her jeans, already realizing that this could not be fixed. Taking a breath of fresh air, she headed towards the door, behind which she already knew that they were waiting for her. It was warm and cozy inside, just like she remembered this place, even despite the rainy weather and all the troubles along the way. When Gwen opened the door and entered the house, her heart began to beat faster. Immediately, she heard her mother's voice, filled with excitement and joy. "Is anyone home?" she asked as she entered the living room. The sound of a joyful voice came from the kitchen. Dorothy, her mother. She looked around the corner and, seeing her daughter, rushed to her with a wide smile. "Daughter!" Dorothy hugged her, barely holding back tears of joy. "Are you really here for good?" Gwen felt the warmth of her mother's embrace and responded, trying to hide her own tears. "I hope so. But if this city continues to present me with unexpected moments, like today, I might be offended." She laughed it off as she walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was just as she remembered it, cozy and filled with the aromas of homemade food. Eva, the cook, immediately appeared, who at one time became like a second mother for Gwen. "Oh, Gwen, you're back," Eve exclaimed, hugging her. "I'm so glad to see you. How your day went?" "What can I say? The luggage was lost, the car was sprayed, and Dash was following me all the time. But apparently this is just the beginning," Gwen answered, trying to hide her tiredness. "What's delicious?" Eva shook her head, smiling. "I've already prepared your favorite dish, lasagna. Do you remember how much you loved her?" "Of course I remember." Gwen laughed. "This was my favorite food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Soon after dinner, Gwen noticed her father, Mr. Gilbert, enter the dining room. Alex was a handsome man with a stern expression, but his eyes always sparkled when he looked at his daughter. "Oh, baby, I missed you so much," he said, reaching out to hug her. "How was your flight?" "Well, something like that." Anyway, Gwen smiled. "Got caught in a cloud of rainwater and found out that my luggage was lost. Thunderstorm in life," Alex remarked, seating Gwen at the table. "But since you're here, everything should work out for the better." Over dinner, the conversation turned to Gwen's plans for work. She happily shared how she wanted to work on complex cases and how important the work of a lawyer was to her. Dorothy, noticing how Gwen perked up, began talking about plans for the future. "You know," she began, "I made an agreement with the Lewises over the weekend. We were planning to have dinner together." Gwen noticed her father look at her sternly. "You know that Eric is a good guy and a great match for you." Gwen rolled her eyes and replied, "Yes, Dad, I remember. This is your good part. I've already heard it." "We want you to be happy," Alex replied. "We just want to see you in good hands." "Don't worry," Gwen said with slight irritation. "I can sort out my own affairs." Dorothy intervened to calm the tension. "We're just worried about you, honey. Eric is a really good guy. We see him as the right man for you." Gwen sighed, but did not continue the discussion. She knew it was no use, and it is better to focus on the positive aspects. After dinner, they recalled funny stories from their childhood. "Do you remember?" Dorothy laughed. "When you climbed the tree, Eric ran to call someone to take you down." "Yes, I remember," Gwen laughed. "He ran home so that no one would know about it, and you just met him and asked where I had gone." "Eric," Dorothy laughed. "He was still a boy then. Now he has become such a handsome man. He grew up and matured." Gwen rolled her eyes again. "So, is it starting again?" she asked sarcastically. Okay, Dorothy agreed with a smile. "We're just proud of how you've all grown." After dinner, Gwen went to her room where she could be alone for a while and catch her breath. She picked up her phone to text Irene, her old friend, to let her know she was back in town. She was looking forward to meeting friends and old acquaintances. As she got ready to visit Irene, Gwen thought about how quickly time had flown by. It seems like just yesterday she was leaving, and now she has returned to her native land. The time spent away has changed her. She became more confident and mature, but sometimes she found it both fascinating and frightening. When evening came, Gwen met with Irene, and they immediately began discussing everything that had happened in the 3 years that Gwen had been out of town. Spending time with family and friends helped her feel more confident and calm, despite the challenges she faced along the way. The evening was filled with anticipation and excitement. Gwen's former classmate who was throwing a party in honor of his birthday. They were both in high spirits, ready to enjoy the night's atmosphere, which promised to be bright and memorable. "Well, how do you like my outfit?" Irene asked, turning in front of the mirror. She wore an elegant black dress that showed off her slender figure. "Do you think I'm too bright?" Gwen laughed and patted her friend on the shoulder. "Irene, you always look great, and this is just right for Travis's party. Look at you. You can't have problems," she answered confidently. Irene nodded and grabbed her purse. "Good, because I was going to get another bottle of wine. I think this will be necessary." They left the house and got into a taxi. Along the way, Gwen and Irene discussed the latest news and reminisced about old times, and shared their plans. When they arrived at the scene, the noise and music coming from the apartment could already be heard from the street. Gwen noticed her heart beating faster with excitement. The party was in full swing, and it was obvious that there would be fun here. "Well, let's go ahead," Irene said, grabbing Gwen's hand. "We won't stand here like two pillars." They entered the room and were immediately greeted by a pleasant and the smell of fresh cocktails. People were dancing to loud music, and there was a spirit of relaxation and fun in the air. Travis, who was the center of attention, noticed Gwen and Irene and rushed towards them with a smile. "Gwen, Irene, it's so good to see you," Travis said, hugging both girls. "It's been a long time since they saw each other." "Hi, Travis," Gwen replied, looking at him with a smile. "Amazing party." "Thank you," he replied. "I hope you won't be disappointed. It should be fun here." I have no doubt, said Iyer, looking around. Where is your bar? I need to relieve my fatigue. Travis pointed to a table piled high with drinks and snacks. Everything you want is there. In the meantime, I'll try to entertain some of my friends so that they don't get bored. Gwen and Irene headed towards the bar, where a variety of alcoholic drinks and snacks were set out. Gwen chose a cocktail, and Irene a glass of wine. They stood at the bar, watching what was happening. Look at this, Irene said, pointing to the dancing crowd. Travis, as always, cannot do without such chaos. Yes, Gwen laughed. I always remember his parties. Time flies when you're here. One of their old acquaintances, Jason, who was one of the most popular guys at school, approached them. Gwen and Run. What's the surprise? He said, hugging Gwen. How did you end up here? Back home today, Gwen answered. I hope the evening will be as bright as in the old days. Yes, that's for sure. It's going to be fun, Jason promised. Soon Gwen felt the music begin to take over her. The dancing and party atmosphere made her forget about her daily worries. She danced with friends, laughed, and enjoyed every moment. Travis brought the drink to her. How did you like the party? He asked, his eyes sparkling with pleasure. Amazing, Gwen answered. Thank you for inviting me. I can't remember the last time I had a rest like this. This would not have been possible without you, Travis said with a smile. It was important to me that everything went at the highest level. Irene returned to Gwen with more drinks. Well, are we having fun? She asked. Absolutely, Gwen replied. This is the best thing that could happen after such a day. The dancing continued, and Gwen became more and more immersed in the atmosphere of fun. Various acquaintances approached her to chat, and Gwen enjoyed every meeting. She saw old friends whom she had not spoken to for several years, and this gave her a feeling of nostalgia and joy. By nightfall, the party was in full swing. Gwen and Irene were on the dance floor when Jason approached them with a proposal. Let's have a dance competition. What do you say? Sounds interesting, Gwen smiled. Let's try it. They started dancing, and soon everyone around them joined in the fun. Gwen felt the tension and fatigue melt away, and a feeling of complete freedom came over her. Gradually, the evening came to an end, and Gwen noticed how her friends became tired but happy. She felt that this evening was exactly what she needed to reconnect with her hometown and her old way of life. Time spent at the party helped her remember how important it is to enjoy every moment and find joy in simple things. It's time to slowly wind down, said Irene, looking around at the tired but happy guests. I think we can all go home. I agree, Gwen nodded. This evening was amazing. Thank you, Travis. You truly threw a party to remember. My pleasure, Travis replied, hugging her. It was good to see you again. Gwen and Irene left the party full of impressions and good mood. They discussed how the evening had gone as they walked down the street to a taxi. On the way home, Gwen continued to remember moments of fun and communication. Her soul was full of satisfaction, and she was ready for new events that awaited her in her hometown. The next morning, Gwen woke up feeling a little tired but also in a good mood from the party the night before. She stretched, looking into the sunlight. She felt nice and calm, and Gwen decided it was going to be a great day. She slowly went down to the kitchen. Dorothy, her mother, was already sitting at the table with a book in her hands and a cup of coffee. The aroma of a freshly brewed drink filled the kitchen, creating a cozy atmosphere. Oh, I see someone had a good rest yesterday, Dorothy remarked, not looking up from her book, but with a smile on her face. Yes, the party was a success, Gwen confirmed, sitting down at the table. She poured herself some water and began to drink in small sips, enjoying the silence of the morning. What are your plans for today? Asked the mother, closing the book and putting it on the table. I'm planning to go shopping with Irene, Gwen replied, stretching and standing up. I need to update my wardrobe and at the same time spend time with my friend. Sounds great. In the meantime, I'll be here with a cup of coffee and a book, Dorothy said with a smile. May shopping bring you joy. Gwen quickly got ready and soon heard the doorbell ring. It was Irene. The friend looked ready for some shopping in her stylish, yet comfy outfit. Hello, Gwen, Irene exclaimed, hugging her. Are you ready for a big shopping tour? Hello, Irene. Absolutely, Gwen replied, looking at her friend cheerfully. I already miss shopping in this city. They headed to the car. Along the way, Irene continued the conversation, sharing the latest news and plans. You know that a new boutique has opened in our city. Irene began, getting behind the wheel. I heard that there are simply amazing things there. Yes, I didn't hear. Gwen responded in surprise as she settled into the passenger seat. So this definitely needs to be checked. Agree. Irene nodded. They drove to the mall, and as soon as they got out of the car, Gwen noticed that the mall was quite crowded. Their first stop was a new boutique. Bright display cases and stylish mannequins immediately attracted their attention. Oh, look at this! Irene exclaimed, pointing to the dress on display in the window. I think it's yours. Let me take a look, Gwen replied, coming closer. She stretched out her hand and looked at the dress, which indeed looked very attractive. They entered the boutique, and Gwen was immediately immersed in the world of clothing and accessories. She tried on different outfits, and each new thing gave her mixed feelings. How do you like it? Irene asked, holding a fashionable jacket in her hands. I think this will suit you perfectly. Very stylish, Gwen agreed, trying on the jacket. But maybe it's better to look at something else. This went on for several hours. Gwen and Irene went through different outfits, tried out new looks, and shared their impressions. Gwen was amazed at how easy it was to forget about time when you were among your favorite things. So how? Irene asked, stretching her arms out tiredly as they finally picked out a few things. I think we have a reason to celebrate our purchases. Yes, exactly. Gwen agreed, trying to collect her purchases. I didn't expect shopping to be so tiring, but pleasant. They headed towards the checkout when Gwen noticed a store that sold vintage items. Listen, Irene, let's take a look there, Gwen suggested. I see something interesting. Irene, tired but still in the mood for shopping, nodded. Okay, just for a minute. I'm not sure how much longer I can go shopping. They walked into a vintage store, and Gwen immediately felt the antique and nostalgic atmosphere. The shelves were filled with rare items, vintage accessories, and beautiful fabrics. Wow, look at this, Gwen said as she found a vintage S-style dress. It's just amazing. It's really beautiful, agreed the siren. Try it on. Perhaps this will be your next masterpiece. Gwen went to the fitting room and soon came out in a dress that fit her perfectly. Irene looked at her friend and nodded. This is exactly what you need. You look great. After Gwen purchased a few vintage items, they headed to the parking lot, where Gwen noticed the sun starting to set. Today was a good day, Gwen said as they got into the car. Even if we were a little tired, shopping was exactly what we needed. I absolutely agree, nodded Irene. They didn't enjoy spending time with you. After a long day of shopping, Gwen and Irene decided to take a break. They went to a cozy cafe, which was located near the shopping center. The cafe was famous for its desserts and aromatic coffee. When the girls walked inside, the room was quite lively, but still cozy. Soft sofas and tables with decorative flowers created a pleasant atmosphere. Gwen and Irene found an empty table by the window overlooking the street. I'm so tired, Irene said, sitting down and taking off her bag. But it was a great day. Oh yeah, Gwen agreed, sitting down across from him. Now let's relax a little and enjoy coffee and desserts. While Irene studied the menu, Gwen leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. At this time, the cafe was filled with the pleasant aroma of coffee and fresh pastries. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the man who was entering the cafe. Can't be. Gwen froze as she recognized the man. Anticipation hung in the air. What's happened? Irene asked, following her friend's gaze. Eric, Gwen whispered, not believing her eyes. A guy with broad shoulders and an attractive face noticed Gwen and headed towards their table. As he approached, his face broke into a wide smile. Can't be. Gwen. He stopped opposite, not believing that he saw her here. Oh my God, Eric, Gwen exclaimed, standing up and hugging him. They had not seen each other for several years, and it was unexpected and pleasant. What a beauty you have become, Eric noted, still not believing in a random meeting. When did you arrive? Yesterday afternoon, Gwen answered, her face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't think we'd meet here by chance. I didn't expect it either, Eric grinned. Listen, can I sit down with you? I just finished some business meetings and would love to spend some time with you. Certainly, Gwen nodded, motioning for him to sit down. Eric sat down at the table, and the conversation immediately became lively and relaxed. Irene, sensing that her presence might be out of place, offered politely, "Maybe I should go get coffee and desserts? Otherwise, I see how happy you are to see each other." "Thank you, Irene," Gwen nodded. "Eric and I will talk now, and you order something delicious for us." As soon as Irene left, Gwen and Eric began talking. "How is your life?" Eric asked, smiling. "Everything is fine, thank you. I just graduated, and I want to find a job here as a lawyer," Gwen said. "It's quite difficult, but interesting." "Great," said Eric. "I'm proud of you. I also run my own business, but it's not nearly as exciting as your new business." "Perhaps," Gwen agreed, looking at him in surprise. "You look good. So much time has passed, and you haven't changed." "Well, maybe a little," Eric laughed. "But I also changed a lot in my life." "How are your parents? How did they react to your return?" "They were very happy," Gwen replied. "Especially Mom. She's already making plans to spend time with you." "And that's wonderful," Eric said, looking around. "I have free time this evening. Maybe we can go somewhere together?" It would be nice to continue the conversation and reminisce about the good old days. Gwen hesitated but quickly decided. "Why not?" She smiled. "I wish I could." When Aaron returned to the table, Gwen and Eric continued their conversation. They discussed many topics. News from the past, changes in life, old friends, and memories of childhood. The atmosphere was light and relaxed, as if there had not been a long break between them. "Do you remember how we walked through the park and climbed trees?" Eric recalled, laughing. "Your attempts to jump onto the highest branch always ended funny." "Yes," Gwen smiled. "You have always been my hero, who ran away to avoid being scolded." Gwen laughed, realizing that there was more truth to the joke than one might think. "Okay, it's time for us to go," she said. "When will you be free in the evening?" "Right after I finish here," Eric replied. "I will try to be free as quickly as possible." "See you in the evening," she said with a smile. "See you later," Eric replied, following her with his gaze as she and Irene headed towards the exit. As they left the cafe, Irene looked at Gwen curiously. "Well, how do you like him?" she asked. "Nothing," Gwen replied, smiling. "He is no longer the boy I knew before. And that's good. I'm glad we met." Irene nodded, pleased that her friend had once again found a connection with the past. They headed towards the house, discussing the details of the upcoming evening and enjoying the last moments of the bright day. The evening was quiet and calm as Gwen twirled in front of the mirror in her bedroom. She carefully chose her outfit, putting on one dress after another, and stopped from time to time to evaluate the result. The closet was filled with different options, and Gwen was looking for the perfect combination for the upcoming evening. "Where are you going so beautiful?" Dorothy smiled, going into her daughter's bedroom and watching the process. Gwen, having already changed into an emerald dress that emphasized her figure, turned to her mother with shining eyes. "You won't believe it. I met Eric today. He invited me for a walk," Gwen answered, her face glowing with happiness. "Oh, this is wonderful." Dorothy raised her eyebrows with interest, looking at her daughter. "Have you not seen him for so long?" "This is a good sign." Gwen nodded with a smile, fixing her hair. "Yes, I think so too. I need to look good. He was always very attentive and charming." "And you too," Dorothy added, hugging her daughter. "I hope the evening goes well. If anything, don't forget to call me." "Okay, Mom. I promise everything will be great." Gwen answered and went to the exit. Eric picked up Gwen exactly at the appointed time. He looked impeccable in a suit that showed off his figure. Gwen noticed that his eyes lit up when he saw her, which pleasantly surprised her. "Hello," Eric said as he opened the car door. "You look absolutely amazing today." "Thank you." Gwen smiled as she got into the car. "And you weren't wrong with your choice of costume." "Well, I'm trying." Eric laughed as he got behind the wheel. "First, let's go to the cinema, and then we'll see what else we can do." On the way to the cinema, they talked about recent events. Gwen talked about his successes and life in the big city, and Eric shared his new projects and plans. "I still can't believe we're back together," Eric admitted. "Time flies, but the memories of you remain." "And I'm glad about it too," Gwen replied. "I didn't even think that I would meet you so unexpectedly." They arrived at the cinema, and the film began. Gwen noticed that during the session Eric often glanced at her, and it flattered her. The atmosphere was relaxed, and although the movie was quite interesting, Gwen couldn't help but notice how Eric looked at her with admiration from time to time. "How do you like the movie?" he asked as they walked out of the hall, opening his car door for Gwen. "Did you like it?" Gwen smiled flirtatiously. "What do you think?" "Not bad." Eric grinned as he got behind the wheel. "But I noticed that during the session I wanted a snack. Maybe we should go to a cafe?" "With pleasure." Gwen nodded, settling into the passenger seat. They headed to a cozy cafe that Eric had chosen. The establishment was quiet and atmospheric, with soft lighting and relaxing music. They sat down at a small table by the window, from where they could see the city at night. "Let's order something delicious," Eric suggested as he studied the menu. "I have some questions that I hope will be answered." "What questions?" Gwen asked, picking up the menu. "I'd be happy to talk." "Well, for example, how do you like life in the big city?" Eric began. "It's like you've always dreamed about this." "Yes, that's true," Gwen replied. "And although life there is quite rich and complex, I like it. I studied a lot, but it was worth it." "That sounds impressive," Eric noted as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "I would like to know more about your plans for the future." "Well," Gwen started thinking, "I hope to develop my career and maybe open my own practice. In the meantime, I enjoy every moment and try not to miss a single opportunity." "Sounds ambitious," Eric praised. "I'm sure you will succeed. You have always been decisive." "Thank you," Gwen smiled. "How are you doing? How do you spend your time?" Eric talked about his projects, business, and how his life has changed in recent years. Gwen was amazed at how he had grown and changed, but still retained the same sincerity and charm. "Do you remember how you and I argued about who manages finances better?" Gwen remembered laughing. "Yes, I remember," Eric answered, smiling. "And I remember how you always won these arguments, even if I was sure that I was right." "Those were good times," Gwen added. "I think we could become good friends again." "I hope so," Eric said, looking into her eyes. "I'm glad that we met and can continue to communicate. I really like you." Gwen felt warm in her soul. They continued the conversation, discussing a variety of topics. Time flew by, and soon the cafe began to close. When it was time to say goodbye, Eric offered to drive Gwen home. "Thank you for the evening," he said, opening the car door. "I really enjoyed spending time with you." "Thank you, Eric," Gwen replied with a smile, looking at him. "I also enjoyed it immensely. I hope this is not the last time we spend time together." "I hope so too," Eric said. "Call me if anything happens. I'll be glad to meet you again." Gwen nodded and got out of the car. When she went home, her heart was warm with memories of a wonderful evening. Dorothy was already waiting for her in the kitchen, where she was drinking tea. "Well, how was your evening?" she asked, looking at her daughter with curiosity. "Wonderful," Gwen said, smiling. "I'm really glad I met Eric. We had a wonderful time." "I'm glad to hear that," Dorothy said, hugging her daughter. "I hope this is just the beginning." Gwen nodded and went to her room, full of new impressions and expectations. She felt like her life was filled with bright colors again and couldn't wait to see what the next day would bring. The next morning, Gwen woke up feeling like her life had changed. The evening with Eric left her in high spirits, and she couldn't wait to find out what would happen next. After breakfast with her family, Gwen decided it was time to take a quiet day to process all the emotions. She was sitting in her room, looking at her shopping items when a message came on her phone. It was Eric. "Hello, Gwen. How was your day? Hope you had a good night's sleep after yesterday." "Hello, Eric. My day was great, thank you. I still remember our evening. How are you doing?" Then I received a new message. "Great. I thought it would be great to see you again. How about tomorrow?" Gwen was delighted by the offer and quickly responded. "Sounds great, looking forward to it. What time is convenient for you?" This was followed by the following message. "How about lunch? I found one new cafe that everyone is talking about. I think you'll like it." Gwen agreed, and they agreed to meet at noon. While she waited, her thoughts remained with the previous evening. Eric was not only attractive, but also a real conversationalist. Their conversations were lively and interesting, and she was glad that they had time to spend together again. The next day, Gwen chose a simple but stylish. She arrived a little early, so she could sit quietly at a table by the window and admire the view. The cafe was cozy with soft sofas and warm lighting. This place promised to be a great option for their next meeting. Eric arrived on time. He looked fresh and confident, and he noticed Gwen immediately when he entered the cafe. "Hi," he said, smiling and heading towards the table. "How are you?" "Hi," Gwen replied, standing up to hug him. "I'm great, thank you. How are you? Good too. This place is really cozy," Eric said, looking around. They sat down at a table and ordered food. While discussing the menu, they continued talking about their recent activities and plans for the future. "You said that you have new projects?" Gwen started. "Tell us about them." "Yes, I'm working on a new startup," Eric said, picking up the menu. "This is due to environmental technologies. We are trying to develop solutions to reduce waste. This is an interesting and complex project." "Sounds impressive," Gwen replied, genuinely interested. "I have always been interested in how such projects develop." "Yes, it's not an easy task," Eric agreed, "but I love what I do." "How was your day?" "Not bad. I just finished some big things, and now I have some free time," Gwen said. "This makes it possible to focus on new projects and plans." "This is great," Eric praised. "I think you will have a great future. You've always been so determined." "Thank you," Gwen smiled. "I'm very pleased to hear this." The conversation continued in the same spirit, and soon food was brought to them, and continued to discuss their interests and hobbies. Eric was attentive to her every word, and Gwen felt that his attention was sincere. "By the way, I wanted to ask," Eric began after they finished eating. "Are you planning to stay in the city?" "I don't know yet," Gwen answered. "I need to think about my career and future, but I would like to spend time here and see what this city has to offer." "I hope you stay longer," Eric said, looking at her. "It would be great to see you here more often." Gwen felt warm at his words. She was glad that they had such common interests and views on life. "I hope I stay too," she said with a smile. "I really like this place and the people here." After lunch, they decided to take a walk in the park, which was located not far from the cafe. The weather was excellent, and this gave their walk a special charm. There were a lot of people walking in the park with children and dogs, which created an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. "I've always liked this park," Gwen said, walking next to Eric. "I remember when we came here with friends." "Yes, it's a great place to walk," Eric agreed. "And I'm glad we're here again." They continued talking, and Gwen noticed that Eric became even more open and relaxed. He shared his thoughts and plans, and this created a feeling of closeness and trust. "What do you think we should do next?" Eric asked, looking at Gwen with interest. "Maybe you have some ideas?" "I think we should just enjoy the moment and continue to get to know each other," Gwen suggested. "Perhaps something good and interesting will appear on its own." "I agree," said Eric. "I'm glad we met. You truly bring joy to my life." They continued to walk, and soon it was time to say goodbye. As they stood at Gwen's door, she felt that this day was special. "Thank you for today, Eric," Gwen said, hugging him. "I really enjoyed spending time together." "Me too," Eric replied, holding her in his arms. "I hope this is not the last time." "I hope so too." Gwen smiled, and they kissed. So a relationship began between them, which became stronger every day. Several weeks have passed since Gwen and Eric first kissed. Their relationship developed rapidly, and they spent a lot of time together. We walked around the park, visited exhibitions and parties, enjoyed. Gwen felt that this was one of the happiest times of her life, and their bond grew stronger. Today was a particularly important event, a family dinner with the Lewises. Gwen and Eric were going to appear together for the first time as a couple, and Gwen was a little nervous. This was the moment when their relationship was about to become more official, and she wanted everything to go smoothly. We arrived at the Lewis house a little early to help with the preparations. They were greeted cordially. "Oh, you're already here," Mrs. Lewis exclaimed, hugging her guests. "We are so glad to see you. Darling, how I miss you." Dorothy answered, looking around. "Thank you for the invitation. Come on in, we're ready." "Mr. Lewis, maybe we shouldn't delay this again?" Mrs. Lewis said, chuckling and heading into the kitchen. The guests settled down in the living room, where there was already a glass of wine and light snacks. "So, how are you feeling?" Mr. Lewis asked, sitting down next to his son. "They say that you have a good time together." "Yes, we enjoy every minute," Eric answered, smiling. "This is amazing. We're glad you found each other," Mr. Lewis said, raising his glass. "For our future. Here's to the future," Alex confirmed, raising his glass in response. I'm also glad to see our daughter happy. Gwen noticed that Alex looked a little tense, but she hoped it was just because he was waiting for dinner. So, how is your work? Mr. Lewis asked, turning his attention to Gwen. How are things going in your legal practice? It's okay, Gwen replied. I haven't looked for a job yet. I just recently returned home and decided to take a little rest. Wonderful, Mrs. Lewis exclaimed when she returned with the dishes. Let's start dinner. I prepared your favorite dishes and hope you enjoy them. Everyone sat down at the table, and the conversations continued in a more relaxed atmosphere. Gwen and Eric tried to keep the conversation going by telling interesting stories and sharing impressions of their recent hikes. By the way, Mr. Lewis said as he ate his dessert, I heard you're planning a trip. Any new ideas? Yeah, we're thinking about going to the mountains next week, Gwen replied, enjoying dessert. This will be a great opportunity to spend time in nature and relax from the bustle of the city. Sounds great, said Mr. Lewis. Hope you have a good time. The conversations continued, and Gwen noticed that the Lewises were becoming more open and friendly. She felt comfortable in this environment and understood that her relationship with Eric was truly important to both families. We have a surprise for you, Mr. Lewis said after the main dinner. Alex and I discussed this and decided it would be good to chat in the future. Gwen and Eric looked at each other, feeling that this moment could be decisive. Yes, I would like to talk about how we can bring our families together and discuss plans for the future, Mr. Lewis continued. Time passes, and it is important to understand where we are going. Alex nodded and added, the Lewises and I thought that if things continued in the same spirit, then perhaps in the near future it would be worth discussing serious steps. I think a wedding could be the next step. Gwen felt her heart beat faster. She knew this conversation could lead to important decisions, and her mind began to spin in a dizzying torrent of emotions. This is a big decision, Gwen said, trying to remain calm. Eric took her hand and looked at her with support. Yes, we are both ready for this step, and we want to do everything possible to ensure that our future is happy and stable, he said confidently. Mrs. Lewis smiled and said, we are very glad to hear this. We hope that everything will work out the way you want. We will support you in any decisions. As dinner ended and the guests began to leave, Gwen and Eric felt like they had taken an important step in their relationship. It was a time of change and new opportunities, and they were ready to meet them together. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Gwen said, hugging Eric's parents. We are glad that you received us so warmly. And we are glad to have you, Mrs. Lewis replied. We wish you all the best. Several months passed, and their relationship continued to develop. The couple made an important decision. They decided to legitimize their feelings. After much discussion and planning, they finally decided on their wedding date. The anticipation and excitement before this event only added joy to their lives. Today they gathered in a restaurant to officially announce their engagement in front of their loved ones. The evening was special, and every moment was permeated with a sense of impending change. Gwen and Eric arrived at the restaurant a little early to check everything out. Gwen was dressed in a beautiful evening dress that emphasized her grace and femininity. Eric looked dapper in a classic suit. Ready? Eric asked, looking at Gwen with a smile. Yes, it's ready, she replied, squeezing his hand. I can't wait for everyone to find out. The restaurant was decorated in warm colors, and candles and flowers created an atmosphere of romance. As the guests began to arrive, Gwen felt her heart beat faster. She noticed her parents, the Lewises, and several close friends who had come to share this important moment with them. Once everyone had gathered around the table and taken their seats, Gwen stood up to give a short speech. She looked at Eric and took a deep breath. She began, her voice trembling with emotion. We are glad to see you here today. We want to share very important news with you. Eric and I decided to tie the knot in our lives. Applause and cheers rang out in the hall. Gwen and Eric exchanged awestruck glances, and then Gwen continued. We have chosen the date for our wedding. It will take place in a few months, and we look forward to this day. Thank you for being here to support us. Congratulations, Dorothy exclaimed, standing up and hugging Gwen. You have changed so much since you came home. I became more feminine and happy. Mother, Gwen hugged her back. With Eric, I really became truly happy. Later, at dinner, conversations continued in a more relaxed atmosphere. "What a beautiful ring," said Mrs. Lewis, examining the engagement ring on Gwen's finger. "This is great. Thank you." Gwen smiled. "Eric chose it himself, and I'm absolutely delighted." "We're very happy for you," Mr. Lewis said, pouring a glass of wine. "You both look happy. What are your plans for the wedding?" "We have already begun preparations," Eric answered. "It takes a lot of time, but we enjoy the process. We plan for everything to be perfect." "How are the preparations going?" Dorothy asked, serving dessert. "Oh, not as easy as I thought," Gwen said. "You need to decide on the place, time, guests. This all takes a lot of time and effort." "We are ready to help," offered Messy Lewis. "If you need help with organizing, please don't hesitate to get in touch." "We really appreciate it," Eric responded. "In fact, help would be very helpful. We already have a list of tasks that we need to solve. For example, we need to choose a place for the ceremony and banquet." Gwen continued, "We would like to have a wedding in a beautiful place in nature." "Excellent choice," said Mr. Lewis. "I'm sure everything will work out great." "So what's the next step?" "Now we are choosing a wedding dress," Gwen said, smiling. "This is also not as simple as it seems. I've already spent several days searching, and it seems like things are only getting more complicated." "Mom and I can help you with that," Mrs. Lewis suggested. "If you want, we can go to wedding salons together." "That would be great," Gwen agreed. "I'll be glad for your help." The evening continued in a warm and friendly atmosphere. All the guests were happy for the couple and discussed the upcoming wedding with great enthusiasm. When the evening came to an end, Eric walked the bride home. "I'm so glad this is all happening," Gwen said when they got home. "It will be an incredible day." "Me too," Eric replied, hugging her. "We will cope with all the difficulties and make our wedding the way we see it." The long-awaited day arrived, and from the very morning, Gwen was absorbed in exciting and joyful experiences. She woke up feeling awe and some mixed feelings of excitement and happiness. This was the moment she had been waiting for so long. But, as it turned out, it became the beginning of a completely different story. The evening sun bathed the church hall in golden light. The guests were already taking their seats, and whispers of discussion filled the space. Gwen stood in her room, wearing a wedding dress that fit her figure perfectly. Dorothy, her mother, was nearby, her eyes full of pride and excitement. "You look great," said Dorothy, stroking the hem of her daughter's dress. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom," Gwen replied, trying to smile, although the nervousness was still on her face. When it was time to leave, Gwen took her father, Alex's arm. They went out to the church under the admiring glances of the guests. Gwen was sure she couldn't have looked better at that moment. All eyes were glued to her, and despite the excitement, she felt like a queen. "Are you ready?" Alex asked, looking back at her with a warm smile. "Ready," Gwen confirmed, squeezing his hand. As Gwen approached the altar, she noticed that Eric looked particularly nervous. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. Gwen tried to focus on his eyes to keep her anxiety from taking over. The priest began the ceremony by talking about love and fidelity. Gwen did not take her eyes off Eric, trying to catch at least a drop of calm in his face. Finally, the moment of vows arrived. Gwen took a deep breath and prepared to listen to the words that were to be the culmination of their love. "Gwen," Eric began, his voice firm, but there was a noticeable tremor in it. "You are beautiful, but lately there have been too many of you. I can't marry you. And yes, I have another one, and she's pregnant from me." The hall erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Gwen felt her heart stop instantly. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she stood up in horror to run outside. Gwen stood outside, overcome by a strong emotional storm. Everything around seemed blurry and distant. People continued to whisper and laugh inside the church as Gwen struggled with her own tears. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a street homeless man who was sitting near the church with his hand outstretched. At that moment, Gwen made a decision. She approached him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Could you do me a favor and marry me?" Homeless Oscar looked at her in surprise, not understanding what was happening. "Are you serious?" "Yes," Gwen nodded, her voice full of determination. "If everything is paid for, then why waste time?" She took his hand, and they entered the church together. "Meet Oscar, and he will become my husband." Gwen's parents were beside themselves with anger and confusion. Dorothy approached her daughter and tried to convince her. Honey, you're not yourself right now. But why do you need the first person you meet? Also, some kind of homeless person? You know, Mom, Gwen answered loudly, her voice filled with determination. I made my choice, and I can no longer be convinced. Alex, her father, barely containing his anger, approached his daughter. Wake up, daughter. I don't approve of your choice. Father, Gwen looked at him firmly. I don't need your approval. I'm already an adult, and I can decide for myself who I want to live with. Then you won't get a penny from me again. Alex shouted as he turned and left the church, leaving Gwen and Oscar standing alone in front of the altar. There was silence inside the church. The guests were shocked. Many did not believe their eyes. Gwen and Oscar, despite all the circumstances, stood in front of the priest. Well, she began. Let's continue. Oscar was confused, but his eyes were full of sincerity. He said the vows with as much excitement as Gwen. Despite the chaos and unpredictability of the situation, they both felt that they had found something important in each other. Gwen and Oscar left the church with a new status, and despite all the public glances and whispers, Gwen felt a lot of emotions building up inside her. They moved towards the exit, where Gwen finally sat down on the steps and, unable to contain herself, began to cry bitterly. Why is this happening to me? Gwen sobbed, peering into the darkness surrounding her. How could I be so wrong? Oscar walked towards her, slowly getting down on one knee. His eyes are full of sympathy, and he reached out his hand to wipe away her tears. Gwen, I want to confess something to you, he said, looking into her eyes. I have something important to tell you. Do you have a pregnant girlfriend too? Gwen asked, still sobbing. No, Oscar answered, smiling slightly. In fact, I want to show you where we will live. Let me show you around. He stood up and pulled her along with him. Gwen, still full of emotional excitement, followed him with difficulty. They headed to a large car that was waiting outside the church. Oscar opened the door for her to sit down. As they drove, Gwen couldn't contain her emotions. Is this your car? She asked, her voice filled with worry. Yes, Oscar answered. I know this all seems strange, but I wanted you to know who I really am. Half an hour later, they arrived at a huge mansion that looked like a real palace. The gate was high and majestic. Oscar, having opened them, stood aside and motioned for Gwen to enter. This is my home, he said, proudly pointing to the imposing building. I hope this helps you understand who I really am. Come on. Gwen looked at the mansion with her mouth open, her eyes wide in surprise. Are you serious? Is this your house? Yes, Oscar confirmed, opening the door with a smile. I have my own corporation. I invest money in various social projects, and today I had to dress up as a homeless person to independently test the effects of one idea. They entered the house, and Gwen immediately felt her emotions begin to change. The atmosphere inside was warm and cozy. The manager, Josephine, met them at the door. Mr. Leonard, is dinner ready? Yes, Josephine, serve, Oscar replied. There was softness in his voice. And meet my wife, this is Gwen. Didn't I hear? Josephine said, her eyes widening in surprise. I didn't hear anything, Oscar smiled. Please prepare a separate room for my wife. She needs to get used to the new place. Of course, Mr. Leonard. Josephine nodded, her voice full of respect. After they ate dinner, Josephine approached Gwen with a bag of clothes. Mr. Leonard asked me to prepare this for you, she said, handing Gwen the package. If you need anything, let me know. Oscar, Gwen said, her voice full of gratitude as she looked at the clothes. These outfits are great. Thank you very much. You are my wife. Oscar answered with a slight smile. I'll have to spoil you. We're just getting started. Gwen, completely delighted with what was happening, looked at Oscar with a smile. Later, as Gwen walked into her new room, she felt her inner tension begin to release. There was such luxury and comfort around her that she could hardly believe what was happening. Oscar and Gwen were walking along the ocean coast, and the night enveloped them in the soft light of the moon. The wind was fresh, and the sound of the waves crashing on the shore created a soothing melody. Gwen, wrapped in a scarf, felt like she was in a fairy tale. She put her arm around Oscar's shoulders, and he, in turn, pressed himself against her, smiling. "You know, to be honest, I don't like surprises," Oscar said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Well, I really enjoyed this evening." Gwen accepted the glass, and her eyes sparkled with sincere joy. "I've never done such things," she replied, raising her glass coquettishly. "But I think you're very good. I like all this." They stood hugging each other and enjoying the silence and sounds of nature that surrounded them. Oscar looked at Gwen with tenderness, awe evident in his eyes. "Gwen," he said, "I want you to know how much it means to me that you are here with me. This evening is one of the best of my life." "I'm glad to hear that," Gwen smiled. Oscar took her hand and rubbed her fingers lightly to warm it up. "Tell me more about yourself," he asked. "What are your hobbies? What do you like?" Gwen was silent for a moment, searching for her words. "I love to travel," she began. "It makes me feel like I'm free, and I'm also interested in painting. It helps me relax and express my feelings." Oscar nodded, listening to her with attention. "You know, I'm focused on social projects," he said. "I invest in ideas that can help people improve their lives. We recently launched a project to educate children from disadvantaged families." "This is wonderful," Gwen said. "I have always admired people like you, but it probably takes a lot of time and effort." "Yes, sometimes it's difficult," Oscar admitted. "But when you see that your efforts actually help, it's all worth it. And I think you also understand what I'm talking about." They continued to walk along the beach, and in their conversation there appeared the ease inherent in people who really found a common language. As they talked, Gwen noticed Oscar looking at her with deep interest. Her heart began to beat faster when she saw the genuine affection in his eyes. "Oscar," she said, "I never thought my life would change like this. This is some kind of new world for me." "This is the new world," said Oscar, pressing her. "And I'm glad you're in it with me." They continued their walk, and Gwen noticed how she was becoming more and more comfortable. Her time with Oscar had been a real eye-opener, and she felt like he had truly become a part of her life. "Can we walk a little more?" Gwen asked, her voice full of hope. "Of course," Oscar replied. "Let's enjoy the moment." Weeks later, when they became husband and wife, Oscar and Gwen continued to strengthen their relationship. There were many interesting moments in their lives, and every day they discovered something new in each other. Gwen felt that she had found a true partner with whom she could share her dreams and plans for the future. Their days were filled with joy and laughter, and every evening spent together was like a new gift they gave each other. This was the path they had started together, and Gwen was ready to walk it, holding Oscar's hand and enjoying every moment of their new life. One day, Oscar suggested throwing a party to celebrate their new life. Gwen, delighted by the idea, decided to invite her relatives and friends. This was supposed to be an event that would demonstrate how much she had changed and how happy she was. "Gwen, are you sure everything will go well?" Dorothy asked worriedly as they discussed plans. "I will not survive this shame again." "Mom, it won't be as scary as you think," Gwen reassured her. "Just relax and try to enjoy yourself." Meanwhile, Oscar, preparing for the party, organized everything down to the smallest detail. His luxurious mansion became the ideal setting for their celebration. When the guests began to gather, their faces expressed surprise and admiration. "Girlfriend, you're lucky with the homeless man," Irene joked, walking up to Gwen with a wide smile. "I would never have thought that he would be so wealthy." Gwen laughed, unable to hide her joy. "Yes, I myself was shocked when I found out the truth," she admitted, hugging Irene. The music was loud and the atmosphere was full of fun. Guests began to fill the garden, and everything seemed perfect. However, Gwen couldn't help but feel nervous when her parents were still missing. "They're not coming," Gwen said, her voice filled with worry. "I think they just can't accept what I did." Oscar hugged her and tried to console her. "Darling, don't worry. I'm sure they just need time to understand the situation. But they will come. Somewhere deep down they still worry about you." While they were talking, the doors to the garden opened and Dorothy and Alex Gilbert entered. Their faces were full of surprise. "Alex, look at this mansion," Dorothy said, her voice shaking with shock. "I can't believe my eyes. This is simply incredible." Oscar and Gwen greeted them at the door with warm smiles. "Dad, Mom," Gwen began, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "You already know my husband. He has his own corporation, so you don't have to worry about your daughter." Alex, slightly embarrassed, extended his hand to Oscar. "Nice to meet you, Oscar," he said. "Frankly, I'm impressed with what you were able to do. This is simply incredible." "Thank you, Alex," Oscar replied, shaking his hand firmly. "We try to create something special both for ourselves and for those around us." Gwen, noticing that her mother was looking at her with obvious relief, pulled Dorothy aside to talk a little. "Mom," she said, hugging her, "I'm so glad you came. You know, this means a lot to me." Dorothy replied, looking at her daughter tenderly. "Now, Gwen, I'm calm for you. I see that you are in good hands. Oscar is truly a wonderful person." "Thank you, Mommy." Gwen smiled, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "He's great. I've never been so happy." At this time, Oscar and Alex are heading to the office. "Exchange greetings." "Alex," Oscar began, "I'd like to discuss some business ideas. I think we may have common interests in this direction." "Of course," Alex replied. "I'm always interested to know how things are going with the people I contact." Gwen and Dorothy continued their conversation, which became more intimate. "You know," Dorothy began, her voice full of excitement, "when I found out that you were marrying a homeless person, I was very worried. But now I see that you are in a good place. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Mom," Gwen said, hugging her tightly. After the talking and discussion ended, Gwen and Oscar met up with the party guests again. They were enjoying the evening, socializing with friends and family who were now accepting this new stage in Gwen's life. As part of their own, the evening continued. Music played and laughter echoed throughout the mansion. Gwen and Oscar, surrounded by loving and supportive people, felt like their lives were just beginning.